my stuff.
All right, so we are recording, it looks like. Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining. It's nice to see some familiar faces and some new people as well. It's nice to get more people involved, and I like having it recorded so that anyone who is missing this can also catch up and see what it's all about and maybe join us the next time. So I will go ahead and share my screen. I have a little presentation today. So let's get this going. All right. And I will start. Oops. There we go. All right, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay. Can you also see the people on the side, all of us? Is that blocking part of the presentation like I see it?
Yes.
Okay. I think that was the problem initially, so I'll get people down here so that it's not. All right. So today we're going to be talking about gut health part 2. If you were here on a week ago or a month ago on Monday when I did my previous presentation, it was on fiber. And so that was kind of the gut health part 1. We talked about fiber. We talked about the benefits of fiber for our digestive system, the way that it can both help you have more regular bowel movements, but also can help resolve if your bowel movements are a little bit too frequent. So we're going into gut health part 2. We're going to talk about prebiotics and probiotics today. And this actually came from a question from a resident. At the end of last month's presentation, I asked for any ideas, any kind of hot topics that you all might be interested in. So this was one that I thought would be worthwhile to share. So I got to do some research on my own, and I'm going to share that with you today, talk about the differences between prebiotics and probiotics. I think probiotics are one of the somewhat trendy supplements on the market, and I want to divulge that a little bit, talk about what a probiotic is, what a prebiotic is, and also identify the sources that we have within our diet, that it's not only from a supplement. So with that, we'll go ahead and start. Can everyone hear me okay so far?
Yes.
All right, great. Okay, so we'll start with prebiotics. I think this is the less well-known of the two. I think probiotics is something that we hear pop around a lot, and prebiotics is something that we might confuse with probiotics, or we're just not quite familiar with what it is. So prebiotics are plant fibers, technically. So from a fruit or a vegetable, it is that same fiber that we talked about earlier. The role of these fibers is that they stimulate growth for the probiotics that are in our belly, in our intestines. So they're essentially the food for the probiotics. And that's kind of why I like this little picture, this Pac-Man diagram. The prebiotics are the little food bites for the probiotics inside our intestines. So we can get prebiotics from fruits and vegetables. And it is the part of those fruits and vegetables that is non-digestible. So oftentimes it's the non-digestible fiber component or the resistant starch. A starch is technically a long chain of carbohydrates or sugars that is present in lots of fruits and vegetables, lots of grains. And in the digestive process, our body works to break down a long starch molecule into much smaller molecules that we can utilize for energy. There are components of those fruits and vegetables, however, that are resistant to that digestion, hence the name resistant starch. So those non-digestible components will pass through our digestive system, our gut, and make its way to the colon, which is at kind of the very end of the digestive process. And in that area, they become food for the bacteria. And those are healthy bacteria that are in our gut, the ones that we want there. And so we're trying to feed them the healthy prebiotics. So prebiotics feed the probiotics. And one way that I think I remember learning in my undergraduate courses is you can use the prefix pre, knowing that it comes before. And so you can think of the prebiotics come before the probiotics. So the prebiotics are feeding the probiotics. All right, we'll talk about probiotics now. So as I mentioned, they are those bacteria. So they're living organisms in our gut. And if we take a probiotic supplement, that supplement will contain those live organisms. So that will contain some bacteria, actually living microorganisms. And if we consume that supplement, we're adding to the population of bacteria that's already present in our gut. So when we're born, as we start to grow, we start to develop the bacteria in our gut. And a lot of that is inspired by whatever nutrition we're getting as infants. So whether it's from breast milk or formula, as we start to introduce foods, we start to build our gut microbiome is what it's called. So it's like a little subculture of living organisms that we want there. So they're desirable. You can find probiotics in both a food and supplement form. So as I mentioned, if you take one supplement, that would be a capsule often that contains the living organisms. And if you were to find it in a supermarket, you would actually find it in the refrigerated section because they're live. We want to keep them alive. Heat can often kill them. If we think of a food form of probiotics, an easy one to think of as containing those cultures is yogurt. Oftentimes, yogurts will have added bacterial cultures, but a lot of them contain it naturally just in the process of making yogurt. So if we talk about the gut, there are a lot of terms for the gut and the bacteria that are there. So the bacteria in our gut or in our digestive system create, as I said before, their own little micro ecosystem. So it can be called the microbiome, it can be called gut microbiota. There are a lot of words for the bacteria that are there and their environment inside the gut. And the key to maintaining a healthy gut, which is what we want to strive for, is finding the harmony. So we want to keep the microbes that are in there already alive and healthy. So we keep them healthy by feeding them, and that's going to be feeding them the prebiotic. And then if we need to, we can also add more, and that can be either from consuming foods that are high in probiotics or consuming a probiotic supplement if that's necessary. And this little picture, you can see the green part is the colon. So that is the large intestine, and the whole digestive process actually starts in our mouth. So as we take a bite of food, the chewing process is actually the first part of digestion. So that helps us break down food first and foremost. And then we start to secrete enzymes, which are molecules that help further break down foods. And as it continues to go down to our throat, to our stomach, more chemicals are released to help break down our food, help in the digestion process. After the stomach, it'll go down to that squiggly orange thing. That's the small intestine. And from the small intestine, it goes to the colon, and then finally out through the rectum. So if we're talking about good bacteria, it's hard to wrap our minds around that because we typically associate bacteria with being germs, harmful, they get us sick, they're infection and disease. But as I said, the ones in our stomach are ones that we want to keep around. They want to keep them alive and thriving, keep them well fed, keep them happy. A good analogy that I heard for thinking about the gut microbiome, so the little micro ecosystem, is think of it like a neighborhood. So if you have a good neighborhood, you have lots of good neighbors, you keep them happy and you keep them healthy, then there's not too many people moving out. People like to stay there. And you have less of a chance of having bad neighbors come and settle in. So we want to keep a good, healthy neighborhood, because the gut bacteria do a lot of important work. So they help in the breakdown and digestion of food. They also communicate with our immune system. So in the process of digestion and absorption, if our gut bacteria identify something that's not supposed to be there, maybe it is a foodborne pathogen that gets into our stomach, it will signal our immune system to start that immune response. And oftentimes that's the reason we get sick, because the good bacteria are signaling that there's something that doesn't belong there. There's an intruder, right? So that initiates our immune system to try and get that out. And oftentimes that's why we're sick. We're either throwing it up or it comes out when we're on the toilet, because we're trying to get that out of our body. So it is an important player in initiating that immune response. It can also help in monitoring inflammation. So similar to the immune response, we have the inflammatory response. When there are things that are in our stomach or being digested that aren't settling well or are causing inflammation, the bacteria help trigger that identification. So they are hard workers, and the good gut bacteria are ones that we want to keep there. If we think about our intestines, we typically have several strains of two main species. Those two are Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium. Now, I typically see Lactobacillus often in yogurt cultures. Either they're present there and it's listed out that the yogurt contains those, or it might say that the lactobacillus is added back into the culture. So that's typically what I see for yogurt. And if you think about lacto, that's similar to lactose, and that is the milk sugar. And I believe that that is what they most often like to eat as their prebiotic. And that I believe that's how they have their name, lactobacillus. And if you're now wondering if your gut is healthy, we go back to fiber once again. There is that recommended amount of 25 to 35 grams of fiber per day. And that is not only for our digestive health, to keep us regular, to keep us getting in our fruits and vegetables, but it's also the food for that gut bacteria to survive and to replicate. Oftentimes, even if we're getting in that amount of fiber, and even if we're being active and taking care of our health and drinking adequate fluids, it might be out of our hands. Our gut health might not be just dependent upon getting that amount of fiber. Oftentimes, if we have a chronic disease or a suppressed immune system, those are other what we call comorbid conditions, which are conditions that are clustered together that might affect our gut health. And so it is at that point out of our hands. We're not necessarily just focused on treating our gut, but we have to also think about treating the chronic disease or the immune system. And sometimes if we have a suppressed immune system, if we are immunocompromised, that's not always something that we can treat, but we can oftentimes treat the symptoms that are related to that. So it can get a little tricky. It's much easier to assess your gut health if you're a healthy adult, but not everyone is a healthy adult. We have all of these things going on in the background that we might be able to have one thing on our radar going well with fiber intake, but we also have to be mindful of something else. So if we talk about probiotic supplements, there is a cost that's associated with that. It is part of the market to make money. All supplements are. That's what it comes down to. Any vitamin or mineral is a selling point that you're getting in supplement form. So there are probiotic supplements available, and there's definitely nothing wrong with getting probiotic supplements or getting probiotics through supplements. I want to also point out that there are several foods in our diet, or foods that can be incorporated into our diet, that are sources of probiotics. And those typically are clustered together as fermented foods. So I mentioned earlier, yogurt is one that I commonly think of as a probiotic source, and it contains added strains that might naturally be present, but also might be fortified. You can also refer to kombucha, which is a fermented tea. And I think I mentioned this in my previous presentation. In the fermentation process, it does produce some alcohol. The bacteria produce the alcohol. So there is some naturally containing alcohol. So I would caution people to be mindful of that. There is also tempeh, which is a fermented soybean. So it's a good vegetarian alternate. Sauerkraut or kimchi, which are both forms of fermented cabbage, pickled vegetables, miso soup, and kefir, which is like a yogurt drink. It's a little bit thinner than yogurt, but it is a probiotic yogurt drink. Prebiotics, you can find them in the supplement form, but it is much easier to find them in the food form. So prebiotics, again, are the food for the probiotics. So it's the food for the bacteria in our gut. If we look for fiber-rich foods, fruits, vegetables, and whole grains, I mean, you could eat most things in your diet and get some prebiotics for the gut bacteria. Notable sources are potatoes. They contain that resistant starch. So if it's boiled and cooled, that resistant starch is what the gut bacteria like to eat, because that will pass through our system. We won't be able to break it down, and so it will be food for the bacteria once it reaches the colon. Another interesting source, which might not be as pleasant to eat, are green bananas. So bananas in the less ripe form. If you've ever eaten a green or unripe banana, it has kind of that gritty taste or texture. That really is that starch that, as you consume it, chew and swallow it, you won't break it down, but that will be the resistant starch that your probiotics will eat. And if you see this funny looking root vegetable on the right, it almost looks like ginger. That is a Jerusalem artichoke. Now that is a very well-known source of prebiotic because it contains a specific fiber called inulin. And that's another prebiotic source for our probiotics. Now, if you thought prebiotics and probiotics was confusing enough, there's a third term that I'm going to introduce here, and that is synbiotics. I did find this wonderful Venn diagram, though, that kind of lays it all out, and I think it makes sense. So prebiotics, as we will review, that pre comes before the pro. So that is the food for those bacteria in our gut. They're only metabolized, which is another fancy word for broken down, by the gut bacteria and not by us. So we don't break down the prebiotics and use it for fuel, but the bacteria in our gut break it down and use it for fuel. The probiotics are those live bacteria, and it's either the ones that are living in our stomach or it's the ones we are consuming to add to the ones in our gut. They are alive and we want to keep them alive. And then synbiotics are a combination of both pre and probiotics. And oftentimes you will see a supplement that is a synbiotic. So if someone is taking or wants to take a probiotic supplement, it might be a synbiotic form. So it has the probiotic and also it has food for the probiotic. So it's like a little starter package for them. Now, if we go into the research, this is kind of a hot topic. So it is trendy, and there is a lot of interest in the medical field. So it is of research interest. And there's a lot going on, but there's not a lot of definitive findings yet. So although there is research ongoing, there isn't anything to say that they are definitely helpful or safe for various health conditions. Although there are early findings that say probiotics may aid in prevention of antibiotic-associated diarrhea, prevention of necrotizing enterocolitis and sepsis in premature infants, treatment of infant colic, treatment of periodontal disease, and the induction or maintenance of remission in ulcerative colitis. And it's interesting here, a lot of the research, as you see, is related to infants or premature infants, because that's the point where they don't have that much of the gut microbiome yet developed, but they're in the process. And oftentimes that's in the early stages when those issues can start to evolve. So with that research, we know it's ongoing. We know there isn't anything definite, but we also wonder, we might not know if they're necessarily beneficial, but we want to ask, can they cause harm? Again, the findings are not definitive. Apparently, their apparent use is safe in healthy people. So it's generally regarded to be safe for healthy people. However, there is a lack of that definitive evidence regarding side effects, whether the frequency or the severity of side effects. There's not a ton of research that's able to summarize that for us yet. We don't know how it may affect high-risk individuals, whether that's infants, people with chronic disease, people who are hospitalized. There are potential side effects or ways that the probiotics can cause harm, and that may include infections, production of harmful substances by those microorganisms, and any transfer of antibiotic-resistant genes. So sometimes we see if someone takes a lot of antibiotics for various reasons over the course of their life, they might develop some resistance to antibiotics. And similarly, that transfer can occur through the probiotics. Another thing to think about in the supplement form, those supplement bottles, they may list several or the main microorganisms that are in those probiotics, but they might not list all of them. So if you're taking a probiotic supplement, that might contain unlisted organisms. So reminders here, there are several types of bacteria and dozens of species of those types. Probiotics as a supplement is often marketed for specific conditions. And although there is a lot of research, there's a lot of interest in the research, we don't know definitely which are helpful and not, how much to take or how much is safe to take, and who would be most likely to benefit. Sometimes it may be recommended by your doctor while you're taking an antibiotic to also supplement with a probiotic. However, that comes from your doctor, and if you're interested in taking it on your own, we don't know what that appropriate dose is just yet. So as always, I like to say, when considering starting a supplement, definitely talk to your doctor first. Probiotics as a supplement are not well regulated, and anyone can go to the grocery store and buy a bottle and start taking them. It's like most supplements, right? You can go and buy a multivitamin. You can start taking vitamin D or vitamin C. It's not regulated. So that's something that I always recommend. Talk to your doctor, see if it's appropriate, see if there are foods in your diet that you can increase before trying a supplement. But if it is recommended, then your doctor is going to be the one to say what dose you should take and for how long. And that is all I have for prebiotics and probiotics and synbiotics. So those are some resources. Again, these topics are things that I myself refresh on, and so I always like to share those resources with you all, and I'm happy to send those out too. But this is one of those new and upcoming, as I said, hot topics that I think is very interesting, and it's one of those things where we don't necessarily want to buy into the market without informing and educating ourselves yet.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Sophia. And I'm only interrupting to say thank you and also to say I'm going to stop recording and then we'll unmute everybody so everybody can ask whatever questions they want, including maybe what Sophia could talk about in a future session as well. So that's where we got this one from, I believe, right?
Yep,
so
definitely.
I'm going to go ahead and say thank you and hello to everybody in the future on channel 370. And I'm going to hit the stop button.